Good morning and welcome to Worldwide Wisdom. Today, we're learning a discourse of the Alter Rebbe about coping with the chaos of our lives. It's not easy to live in this world. This world is a place fraught with danger, with chaos, with distraction, with confusion. Just last night, we saw the rise of the first Shiite mayor of New York City in a stunning upset to New York City. And we're wondering what on earth is going to be. People struggle with making a living. People struggle with all sorts of anxieties. Think about it a moment. You know where it all started? In the beginning, Adam and Eve were frolicking in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve were frolicking in the Garden of Eden. Life was good, simple, peaceful, beautiful, relaxing. And then came somehow the sin of the sin of the plant of higher consciousness. They took the psychedelic. I don't know, maybe it was psychedelic. I don't know. They took the psychedelic, and suddenly they were punished with grief. That was the punishment, grief. Be'etzev tel divanim, with grief you shall give birth and raise your children. Be'itzavon, with grief you shall work the land, right? The land. I mean, basically, it's the grief of childbirth and child rearing, the grief of the anxiety of making a living, and the grief of illness and death. All those were introduced at the sin of the golden calf. The sin of the tree of knowledge, right? And you think about, okay, that was a pretty bad deal. Didn't go so well. Could have lived without the anxiety. Yet the discourse that we're learning today, it's a discourse from the Alter Rebbe in 1807, Parshas Noach, 1807. This discourse appears in the Chayinu. So if you have the Chayinu booklets, I want to encourage you to save them. This is from Parshas Noach, which would have been 2 weeks ago. It's a series that we're going to be working through. This is a discourse that exposes the depth beneath the waves of the flood of Noach. We're going down deep, scuba diving beneath the waves to understand the purpose of the flood of Noach. The question that the Alter Rebbe is going to ask today, we've actually already started this, by the way. We've started the discourse a couple weeks ago, and we learned that the Alter Rebbe opened up the discourse by saying, he quoted a verse from the Song of Songs saying that many waters cannot extinguish the love, nor can rivers wash it away. If a man would give all the wealth of his house for love, they would utterly scorn him. It's on page 164 if you have the booklets. And we explained, the Alter Rebbe explained that the many waters that won't extinguish the love is talking about the struggles of life, of making a living, that will not overwhelm the natural love of the soul towards God. Right? The worries of earning a livelihood and worldly thoughts will not be able to extinguish the natural love of the soul. The soul is naturally one, united, connected, beloved with God. Right? So that love will never be broken. That's what King Solomon tells us in the Song of Songs. In other words, no matter how intense are the anxieties of making a living, still we will never be able to extinguish that love through the anxieties, through the great torrential waters of the flood. Now, what we're going to learn today on page 166 is that not only do the anxieties of making a living not extinguish the natural love of the soul to God, but hear this, the anxieties of making a living actually will enhance the natural love of the soul to God, will fan the flames of the passion of the Jew's connection to his maker, just like the waters of the flood lifted the ark ever higher. Now that is a stunning idea. It's really life-changing. You think about that for a second. Think about the implications of that idea. The implications are, and this is a novel teaching of the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, who says, obviously rooted in Torah, he says that the purpose, so first of all, he points out, quoting King Solomon, that the anxieties of this world will not overwhelm your spiritual connection. But then he goes on to say that in fact, there's a reason, there's a meaning to the madness. There's actually a positive. The positive is that God put you in this world not only so that you should survive, but in fact that you should thrive. That you should actually emerge stronger. You know, it doesn't kill you. Effectively makes you stronger.
We're better for our struggles.
We're better for our struggles, yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what it's going to say. Now, I just want you to realize as we're about to enter this life-changing concept. Now, it's very important that we should learn this concept inside of the text. I want to very much encourage you to learn to follow this text with me inside and I want you to review it as well. I want you to follow along with the text, to repeat it over and over and over. These are the timeless words of the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad. These are life-changing texts. Thank you, Rob. That are able to not only give us strength, but give us hope. You know, life could be depressing, as Peter writes of you, depressing election implications. Peter, depression is not an option. Depression ain't an option. If you're depressed, you've lost the battle. What we're learning today, Peter, is that the anxieties of our lives are like the chaotic and tumultuous waters of the flood, of the deluge of Noah, which are actually intended for a greater good. Now, the Alter Rebbe is about to ask the following question. He's going to ask the following question. On page 167, he's going to ask the question. Oh, you didn't do that page? We need 166, 68 through 170. So the Alter Rebbe is about to ask a question. Why didn't God need to bring a flood in the first place? Why did he need to bring a flood? Tell me, Chuck, what do you think? What do you think is the reason that God had to bring a flood in the first place? What was he trying to do? Well, no, hang on. Before you go deep, what was he trying to do? What was the literal meaning of what he was trying to do? It says he was angry with humanity. You want to kill him. Now, there's other ways. There's other ways of wiping out the bad guys that are far less messy than a flood that endured for an entire year. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights, but the waters didn't recede until an entire year passed. You know, what, pray tell, does God need to get his hands dirty? He could have, he could have just done some sort of a pandemic.
No, he wanted a purified year.
He could have done a pandemic. He could have done a lightning strike. Listen, I want to tell you something. In the 10 plagues of Egypt, God had all sorts of creative methods, right? He had the death of the firstborn. He had frogs. He had the water turn into blood. He could have come up with something. You know what I mean?
80% in the dark.
Yeah, he could have come up with some plan. Yeah, that's all of humanity in one shot. Yeah. But here's the question, folks. The Alter Rebbe is going to explain, as some of you have alluded to, that the purpose of the flood was not only to wipe them out, it was actually to purify them as a mikvah. The purpose of the flood was to purify a world that had become corrupt, to make it pure. In exactly the same way, when we endure the anxieties of making a living, of paying your mortgage, your credit card bill, and your child's private school tuition to a Jewish education, and you're wondering, why am I doing this? Those anxieties are there not only to drown you, they're there in order to purify you. These words are life-changing. And that is what it means when it says that the flood is called the flood of Noah. Think about this for a moment. Flood of Noah is a paradox. Flood means chaos, right? And what does Noah mean? Serenity. So when you say the chaos of serenity, like what? That's a paradox. The flood, the deluge, the destruction of Noah, the serene deluge, that doesn't make any sense. Alter Rebbe is going to explain that, in fact, the ultimate purpose of the flood was not to wreak anarchy, but rather to bring purity to a world that had lost its way.
But how did that work out?
You tell me how did that work out? No, what do you mean? Well, I'm going to say this to you, Harvey. We're still here.
No, I got that. I wasn't being facetious. But,
so what happened after the flood? Let's talk about after the flood. Guess what happened? After the flood, there's a reference to the 2 years. There's a word in Hebrew, shnatayim. 2 years after the flood, was born Arpachshad, who became the ancestor of Abraham. Now, there's only 3 times in the Torah where the word shnatayim is used, 2 years. Anytime the word shnatayim is used, it's referring to the end of a period of suffering, which begins a period of healing. And it's interesting that the hostages were released in the recent Trump deal exactly in time for the 2-year anniversary of their abduction in the Jewish calendar. Simchas Torah, right? So what happened was that the world was in fact purified, and the gateway was opened for the rise of Abraham, who was the most influential human being in the history of mankind, the father of the Abrahamic faiths, which include Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, where it's, even to this day, 4,000 years later, more than half of the 8 billion people on earth believe in one God. Whereas then, they were all pagans. So I think that's how the cookie crumbled. So let's take a look at this idea, because this idea has got to grow in us. It's going to take us time, folks. It's going to take us time to allow this idea to settle in, because I just want you to realize what this means. This means that Mamdani is good for us. Sorry. Sorry for making you choke. That's what it means. What? That's what it's saying. Effectively, what it's saying is, and forgive me if I hope I'm not quoted like out of context over there, but what I'm trying to say is that Chassidus is teaching us that God is always in control of every single detail. Let me read you a quick message that the Rebbe said about elections in Israel. You know, every time there's an election, people say, this election, this one,
is the most important
election in the history of elections.
For 250 years, every election.
It's never been so important, right? So there was an election. I don't even know what year this was, but here's what the Rebbe says about elections. 2 Jews came to visit me this week, and they raised a suggestion. This is the Rebbe talking. That since we're coming up to the elections in Israel, we should announce a worldwide prayer in order that the election results should be good. As Zol Zain Gut, they should be good. Now, saying Tehillim, praying in the Psalms of David is certainly a good thing at any time, especially at this time of elections in Israel. But there is nothing to be afraid. Nitavas zu schrecken sich. There's nothing to be afraid of when it comes to elections. We have to know and to remember that which our sages say, that God provided a kindness to the Jewish people by spreading them, by scattering them amongst the nations. And what that means automatically is that when our work is in such a way that we are scattered amongst the nations, in a way that we are infusing holiness wherever we are, when our matters are as they should be, then God does kindness with us as well. We have to remember and to know that the key is in our hands. And so to the key to all matters, the keys to life, livelihood, and resurrection of the dead are in our hands right here. And automatically, we have nothing to be afraid of. The matter is only dependent upon us. What the Rebbe is talking about is God is in control. We have a direct line to the CEO. Make sure that you have your direct line to the CEO. And don't believe in idols. Don't worship idols. Mamdani has no power over us. He's got nothing on us. That's what it means. So, but you can see that people are becoming afraid. You can see that there are people that are reacting with elevated anxiety, and that's not Mamdani. There's there's other elections, there's other issues, there's other problems. There's it could be your neighbor that's driving you crazy. It could be your competitor that's making you miserable. It could be your balance sheet, your P&L that's giving you sleepless nights. This anxiety, wherever it is actually there for you. It serves as a wave that threatens to crush you, but that is designed for you to surf over it. Now, we might yearn and aspire. Yes, Terry, it is to purify the earth. That's my point. We might yearn and aspire for a time where we'll be at peace. We won't have any worries. Ish tachas gafnei v'sachas teinos, as the prophet says, each man under his vineyard and under his fig tree. Life would be good. So we aspire to a time like that when we don't have anything to worry about. But you know what's going to happen? It says in Yom Yom that when Mashiach will come, we will miss the days of this exile. when we had such extraordinary challenges that allowed us to scale them in ways that will not be possible
So
when we're
won't be
not faced by
tested-
challenges.
We won't be tested or in a struggle anymore.
I'm not sure if I agree with that
So
conclusion.
I'm asking you a question.
No, so one might think that then we won't be struggling or testing, which makes no sense. Well, how can it be that we will reach a point which is essentially lower than where we are right now?
Sounds like complacency.
But doesn't-
It sounds like complacency, but I would think, and this is a bit exactly what's the point? I would think, and there's a bit of another topic, but I'm just going to mention it. I would think that when Mashiach comes, then we will be able to encounter infinity, God's infinite light. Whereas in this world, we struggle with God's finite light. They will struggle with God's infinite light. And I believe that that's never going to be able to be in a state of complacency because infinity and complacency are non-compatible. I mean, there's a lot of questions associated with that statement. So forgive me if I'm digressing and entering into territory, which is essentially a Pandora's box, but just whatever. But let's go back to our topic here. So I just want to make sure that you can understand where this Maamar is going, because this is sensational stuff. This is saying that the bad things that happen to you are there to lift you up. When it feels like you're drowning and there's waves crashing down upon you, bring out your surfboard. That's what it's saying. And that's like a little much. It's a lot much to process. So let's understand. Let's try to internalize this idea within the original text on page 166. Do you have copies of 166? No. It starts 2.1. Let me see what copy you have here. Yeah, you do. This is it. Yeah, he's got it. Yeah, we've got it. Good. Okay, second page. It starts with chapter 2, rest. We can now return to the great flood, described in an unexpected way by the prophet Isaiah. So what we're going to do now is we're going to learn inside the original text of the Alter Rebbe what we've spoken about orally, so it could become rooted in the text. And the purpose of us doing this, guys, is in order to reflect, to allow you to meditate. But the purpose is in order to allow you to meditate on the original text. When you have a text that you're learning from, you can review it over and over and over, which allows you the clarity to be able to deepen your understanding. In Isaiah's prophecy, the many waters of the great flood described in Genesis are called the waters of Noah, which is a shocking way to describe the waters of Noah. I mean, imagine you called it the Holocaust of serenity. That would be just a weird way to describe the Holocaust, right? It would just be almost infuriating, actually, right? Why would Isaiah, Monday morning quarterback, 1,500 years after the Great Flood, suddenly come up with his prophecy calling it the destruction of serenity? As it is written, as I've sworn that the waters of Noah shall no more go over the earth, so have I sworn not to be angry with you, nor to rebuke you. It's called the waters of Noah. But why would the flood waters be named after one person, the one person who stood apart from the corruption they came to end? Noah is the antithesis of the flood. He's the survivor. He's the one that wasn't subject to the flood. So why is it called the flood of Noah? The answer lies in his very name. For Noah represents tranquility of the spirit, a state of rest like the one who rests from his work, as it is written after 6 days of creation. And he rested Noah on the seventh day. The word rested in the translation of Aramaic as Venach, which means the same thing as Noah. So Noah is to rest. This tranquility takes two forms, represented by a double mention of the man's name. And Noah, in the Torah portion of Noah, it says twice, is understood that there's two kinds of tranquility. There's the lower tranquility, that's the tranquility above, and then tranquility below, This is a little Kabbalistic, so just bear with me a moment here. These in turn correspond to the two levels of Shabbos, the lower Shabbos, which is what we observe every seventh day, and then there's the higher Shabbos, which will be in the days to come, and will be called the day that is always Shabbos. So there's the Shabbos the way we know it, and there's a far greater, intense, eternal calm. Lower Shabbos, as we shall see, is not considered Kula Shabbos. Just bear with me on that one. But let's go back to the story here. So Noah's waters. At first glance, the purpose of the flood is difficult to understand. Why do we need a flood in the first place? If it came merely to remove and destroy the sinners, then why was such a great tumult necessary? God could have removed them in an instant with no flood. He could have given them like an aneurysm, Yeah, poof, they could have just dropped dead, right? Control, Alt, Delete. God could have done that.
Perpetual creation.
Yeah, he could have just stopped creating them. Bam. In fact, however, the flood came to purify the earth. It's quoted from the Gemara Zvachim 113a. For it is said the earth was filled with Hamas. That's what it says, the Hebrew. The earth was filled with Hamas. The word Hamas in Hebrew means
Yeah.
violence or corruption. The earth is greatly corrupted. The earth, we actually learned this in the Medrash, by the way, folks. I want to remind you, about 4 or 5 years ago, we learned the Medrash of Noach. We learned about how they did all sorts of mongrel breeding between species, and they were just very evil and corrupt. So the earth itself needed cleansing. Therefore, God sent a flood of water in order to ritually cleanse the impurity that was present in the world. Turns out the flood was not a deluge alone. It wasn't just destruction. It was actually purification. When a person or a vessel is ritually impure, it is purified by immersion in a mikvah, a body of water that is at least 40 sa'ah in volume. The 40-day-long flood represented a mikvah 40 sa'ah. To make a kosher mikvah, you need to have 40 measurements of water in a pit. Therefore, the fact that the rain rained for 40 days is corresponding to the 40 number. Like a mikvah, the flood came to cleanse the earth of its impurity, which means that there's a far deeper aspect to the negativity of the flood, which is actually very positive. Fulfilling the words of the verse, and I shall sprinkle clean water upon you, and you shall be pure. We can now understand why the flood waters are associated with Noach. May Noach, they brought purity to the land, causing naicha derucha. So where we stand right now is that with an understanding, at least we understand that the Alter Rebbe is trying to tell us that the purpose of the flood was to lift us up. Again, King Solomon said that the great waters will not be able to extinguish the love. There was 2 things we've learned so far. The great waters will not be able to extinguish love. It means that the chaos of the anxieties of making a living will not be able to overwhelm the soul's connection to God. That was the first thing we learned. And the second thing we learned, that the purpose of the flood's waters were to purify the earth. These 2 ideas are connected, right? The 2 ideas are connected because the flood waters represent the difficulty in making a living. The flood water is not just an event in ancient history. The flood waters is a current reality. Right now, you're trying to make a living. You're trying to make ends meet. That is your flood. You're in a flood right now. I mean, if you're alive, you're probably experiencing some sort of a flood. There's no such thing as a person who has no problems, I think, right? Yeah, unless they're in the cemetery, maybe. Well, yeah, I mean, if they lost their mind, they got other problems, right? Of course, they have huge problems. They have huge problems. So these ideas are one and the same. When King Solomon says that the great waters, the anxieties of making a living will not overwhelm the love of the soul, and when we learn that the flood is called the flood of tranquility, it means because the flood is making a living. It's anxieties. Those anxieties are not going to break you; they will build you. So let's continue here as he puts it all together. The Mayim Rabim, now, because we have to understand why. The question we have to understand is, why is it that the anxieties, the challenges, the obstacles in our lives, why do they lift us up? Why does God need to give us problems? Because I love you, that's why I give you problems. That's what it says. It says, what's the verse that says that? It says, Es asher yev Hashem yichiach. The one whom God loves is the one whom he rebukes. The one whom God loves is the one whom he rebukes. Think about it. You got a bunch of kids playing in the streets, and one of them is yours. Which is the one that's going to get the pachin panim? Yours, the one you love. Pachin tochas. Fair enough. He gets the pachin tochas. Is the one that is yours, right? The one that you love is the one that's going to be rebuked. The others, whatever. Right? You just say to them, whatever. So when God loves us, that's when he strikes us. And that's a life-changing idea, folks. This is going to change our perception of all the struggles that we face. Apparently, God loves me very much. Right, because, yeah. So let's understand this idea. The Mayim Rabim, the burden, the great waters, the burden of earning a livelihood is called waters of Noach, waters of tranquility. To explain this, we begin with the rabbinic teaching that states that our father Abraham was offered a choice. This is last week's Torah portion. Abraham was offered a choice. Remember the covenant of the parts? When Abraham was notified, he got the first memo, the first board meeting with God, and God has him make the covenant of the parts, cuts the animals in half, and he says, by the way, your kids are going to suffer for 400 years, but the good news is they're going to come out with great resources. The Medrash tells us that God actually gave Abraham a choice. He gave him a choice of whether he wanted his children to endure purgatory or servitude. What would you prefer if you were given the choice? For your kids to endure purgatory, like a spiritual pain, or servitude, which is a physical pain in this world? Which one is better?
Physical.
You would choose the physical pain rather than spiritual pain.
Yeah.
So not purgatory, you choose servitude. That's what Abraham chose.
If you can overcome it.
He chose the latter. What is the connection between the two? They are each a means of ascent. Servitude and purgatory are each a means of ascent. In other words, God chose it. God offered this to Abraham not because he said, "You're my chosen one, and I now am going to hate you." He said, "No, you're my chosen one, and now I'm going to educate you. Now I'm going to give you an opportunity to scale." I know this is very, very painful. It's really painful, right? But it's he put him through all those tests. Exactly right. For the soul cannot enter paradise to enjoy the radiance of the divine presence without first ascending into purgatory. You can't have it up before you have it down. You can't go into heaven before you first go into purgatory. This is illustrated by the story of the sage turned heretic, Elisha ben Avuya. He's called Acher. Acher means the other one. The sages didn't want to call him by his name because he was a heretic. They just alluded to him as the other one, whose merits prevented him from entering purgatory while his sins blocked him from paradise. His merits, he had too many merits to go into purgatory. He had too many sins to go into paradise. He was stuck in limbo. So what happened was his disciple, Rabbi Mayim, prayed, better that he be judged than undergo purgatory, thus being cleansed and allowed to enter the world to come. His disciple, Rabbi Mayim, who loved him, prayed that he should be allowed to endure the suffering of purgatory so that he would ultimately be able to enter paradise. Be cleansed, exactly. So this is the secret, the spiritual, mystical, Kabbalistic secret of suffering. It is there not to make you suffer, but in order to allow you to rise ever higher. Another step in the soul's journey is a mikveh that you may not have ever heard of before. It's the mikveh in Nahar Dinur, in the river of fire. I remember I was once in Japan, in Kobe, and an Israeli walked into the Chabad house. This would have been 25, 24, 23 years ago. Israeli walked into the Chabad house, and he says, rabbis, there was like a mikveh, a little mikveh in the Chabad house there. He says, I've done so many sins. I need a mikveh of fire. Anyways, another step in the soul's journey is the immersion in the river of fire, as explained elsewhere. This very spiritual concept that before the soul can enter into paradise, it's got to enter into the mikveh of fire. I'm going to share with you how I understand what the mikveh of fire is. It's a form of Gehenna, but the river of fire is a shock therapy treatment to the soul that is so shocking that the soul forgets its default settings. It's like a reboot. It's like a reset. So in other words, to go from the pleasures of this world, in order to go from the pleasures of this world to the pleasures of heaven, you can't just do it in an automatic shift. You have to reset your phone. It's like when you go to another country, you have to turn your phone off and on because it's got to like change the signals and the satellites and the cellular waves and whatever else. So too, when you leave this world and you enter into heaven, you've got to reboot. You've got to go through the river of fire so that you get the shock therapy to reboot, to forget where you're coming from so that you can reorient with where you're going. Turns out that you got all this negative stuff before you get the good stuff. You got to get the river of fire. You got to go through purgatory before you go into heaven. Abraham chose to have servitude, to have suffering and exile before his children would enter into abundance and windfall, right? But here you see a pattern. The same is true of servitude, through which a person can ascend from level to level, reaching spiritual heights, as we shall see. Let's now apply it briefly in the closing piece over here. We're gonna apply it to our struggles of making a living, which again are designed in order to lift us up, in order to build us up. The plain meaning of Abraham's choice of servitude is the period of bondage in Egypt. However, so Abraham was told by God, your children will be slaves in Egypt for 400 years. They're going to suffer. It's going to be miserable. But they're going to come out and enter the promised land. They're going to receive the Torah because they went through that.
But
right?
It really wasn't 400 years of servitude.
Thank God. We don't want to calculate exactly, but the count, they were only in Egypt for 210 years. Right. Servitude, which was bitter, was only 86 years. Right. But the count started from the birth of Isaac. So whatever, we don't want to. Okay, no, right. So here's what goes on. However, bondage exists today as well, and not in the way one might think. How is bondage existing today? How do we have servitude today? Today's servitude does not mean being subject to a king who taxes us. Even when the Holy Temple stood, Israel had kings. and substantial taxes were required. As is known, each individual had to contribute a tenth. Yet those times were marked by extraordinary divine blessings, making the land of Israel a place of supernatural abundance. It was a land flowing with milk and honey, as described in the Talmud, at the conclusion of the Talmud's tractate Ketubot. And its inhabitants are free from material anxiety and financial worries. They didn't have financial worries at the time of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. However, contemporary servitude takes a different form. It lies in the relentless struggle for sustenance, the persistent burden of financial concerns, the constant engagement with worldly affairs. The fact that you worried about AIPAC and ZOA, and you worried about Republicans and Democrats, and you're worried about the new laws that are going to make your life miserable, and the taxes, and is DeSantis going to remove real estate taxes? Is Mamdani going to raise the taxes? What's going to be? How's it going to work? Housing prices, interest rates, all this stuff. It's enough to make you meshuggah. That is the servitude that God is subjecting us to in order to give us the ability to rise, and we are still yet to crack this code. That's why this is a discourse. Torchwood says it's like gold. It takes fire to purify and mold it. You got to put it through the crucible, right? Is that the word, Mike? You got to put it through the crucible in order to be able to refine the gold. This is the nature of this world. So in other words, we are completely resetting our understanding of the bad things that happen to us. Most people see bad things as superficial. They say, well, if something bad happened to you, it means that God doesn't like you. But in reality, it's a crucible, and you've got to be able to look at the bad things that happen to you as a refining experience that will allow you to emerge as extremely valuable gold. I'm just going to read the last piece of it here in order so we can wrap up the idea. The many waters then, which King Solomon is referring to when he says the many waters will not wipe out the natural love of the soul, right? The many waters then are the waters of tranquility, are the waters of Noah. It's the same thing. King Solomon's many tumultuous waters and the tumultuous waters of the Noah's flood, and what Isaiah calls the Holocaust of serenity, the drowning, the deluge of serenity of Noah is all the same thing. For they bring about, for the waters of tranquility, bring about the elevated state of Naicha Derucha. Ultimately, the purpose of the tumultuous waters, of the financial anxieties, of the challenges we face, of the servitude, is in order to reach us to a state of far greater peace. Thanks to the Mayim Rabim, the tumultuous waters, the soul rises to a level beyond its pre-embodied state. Before we descended to this world, we had a very spiritual connection with God. But after we endure the struggles, anxieties, the challenges, the deluge of this world, we reach a far, far higher level than we reached before, than we were holding on before. Then it had basked in the radiance of the divine presence. But just that, it was basking in the radiance of the divine presence. Its work amid the many waters. Launch it now, subsequently, to a far higher place. As our sages taught, better 1 hour of repentance and good deeds in this world than all the life of the next world. In other words, what you're able to achieve in 1 hour in this world is incomparable to what you can achieve in heaven. You can achieve so much more in this world. Now think of it like a bow and arrow. If you want to shoot an arrow and you go like this, you go, it's going to go maybe a foot. But if you go backwards against the direction of the target, it's not going to go hundreds of feet, right? It's the momentum that's built by the counter-intuition. Okay? Beautiful. So this world is a place where divinity is entirely concealed. The other side, forces that are opposed to godliness, seems to hold sway. This world is in short, dark. It's a dark world. An oft-quoted verse speaks of the superiority of light over darkness. The verse can also be read as indicating an advantage in light that is subsequent to darkness. Light that is produced from darkness. When King Solomon says that light is greater than darkness, he doesn't just mean to say that, by the way, folks, newsflash, it's better to be in the light than to be in the dark. What he means to say is the light produced from the darkness, after the darkness, is far greater than the light produced on its own. Quick example, very simple. I remember when I had my braces removed after a couple of years, I just relished the feeling of my smooth teeth, something which I couldn't appreciate beforehand. It was only after you've descended that you're able to subsequently have a greater appreciation. It's the, think of a marriage that has experienced infidelity or experienced challenges or experienced struggles, right? And, they say that a couple that experiences renovation will never get divorced. Right? Because first of all, before the renovation, you were married, fine, you were living together. But after the renovation, you've been through the challenges, it actually brought you a lot closer together. Doing good in this world means overcoming the darkness, the other side's pull, subduing it. Further, this causes the darkness itself to be transformed to light, as we will learn in our next session. The question I'm leaving you with is why? Why? Why is it that the descent brings to a far higher ascent? That is what we're going to learn about. It's going to become very, very personal. So bear with me, stick with me. It's going to be awesome. Thank you. Have a great day. Bring the next book. Bring the Lech Lecha one.